We're going to talk a little bit about early screening. You may or may not be familiar with the screener, but we're going to talk a little bit about what screening is, testing, because they are two different things, and I know it causes a lot of confusion. So we'll try to talk about that today and hopefully help you understand the importance of early screening. Hey, good morning. We're here from the Dyslexia Resource Center and glad to be here with you. Today I have a special guest who is the Senior Manager of Educational Testing at the Dyslexia Resource Center. Her name is Sarah Reling. And so hello to you, Sarah. And tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you've done at the DRC.
Sure. And good morning. Thank you for having me on. Like she said, I'm the Senior Manager of the Dyslexia Testing here at the Dyslexia Resource Center. So my role is to oversee all of the dyslexia evaluations that go on here. So I've got several different evaluators that do all the testing, and we meet regularly to go over all the different cases to really make sure that we're doing a great job at diagnosing dyslexia. And I also do get to evaluate for dyslexia as well, and I've been here for 2 years.
Now, do you test for anything else or just for dyslexia?
So here we just test for dyslexia, that's it.
So that's the expertise and the really what you're focused on.
Yes. So the evaluators are they either possess the Certified Academic Language Therapist certification or they're on track to get it. So yes, we have that expertise in diagnosing dyslexia.
So Sarah, what is your experience with the dyslexia screener? Have you had students come that have used the screener? What do you know about the screener? Do you advocate for the screener?
Right. So yes, the screener is very important. So we get lots of parents that will come to us that will report that their school has done a screener on them for dyslexia, but it's been various types of screeners. It's not always the Shaywitz screener.
Yeah, so let's just talk about the Shaywitz Dyslexia Screener. And the reason that it's important because it has statistically significant sensitivity and specificity. The other screeners do not. And you always want to ask that. It is a good point, Sarah, because a lot of them are just skills tests, which we'll talk about, and they don't have that statistical validity. But the screener, again, that does, and it actually improves as a child. The kindergarten screener is, I believe, like 0.82, and it goes up from there to basically 0.9 and above as you go into first, second, and third grade using the screener. Sarah, can you tell me about the Shaywitz Dyslexia Screener?
Sure. So the Shaywitz Dyslexia Screener is a great screener for all schools to use, especially in those early grades of kindergarten and first grade, to screen those students to see if they're at risk for dyslexia. And that's very important to screen them as early as possible.
So, yeah, let's talk a little bit about the screener. It is one that is statistically significant. It is going to pick up the majority of kids that have dyslexia. It basically tells you if you're at risk or you're not at risk. That's all the screener does. It's like a mammogram. It tells you if you have something that looks like you're at risk for having cancer or you don't. So you want one that's got that validity to it because you don't want a lot of people showing up that say they're at risk for dyslexia, but they don't. And you don't want a lot of kids that have dyslexia and it says you're not at risk for that. So that's that sensitivity and specificity. And again, in the kindergarten years, it's 0.82, and then first, second, third grade, it even gets more specific. It is a language-based test, so it assesses language skills, so age-appropriate language skills. And we at the DRC recommend that the screener be given at the end of kindergarten, the spring or the end of kindergarten. And then, of course, if you're an older child, first, second, or third, there is a screener. There's a screener that goes different one, but for older adolescents and adults. So there's different types of screeners, again, assessing the specific age-appropriate language skills. And the difference between that and some of these, what I would call faux screeners, they're not real screeners, they're progress monitoring tests. So what they do is they will assess one skill, say maybe a skill of, it could be one of the language skills, but it's only one. And that's really not a screener. You want a broad screener that's been tested scientifically and has evidence that it works, and it's looking at the complete language skills that are appropriate at that age. So that's the beauty of the dyslexia Shaywitz screen.
Yeah, at the Dyslexia Resource Center, we test just for dyslexia ages 6 and up, even into adulthood. So the very first part of the process is one of the most critical components, which is getting all the very important clinical history of that child through a parent interview.
So what kind of questions would you ask the parent?
Right. So we are looking for clinical indicators of dyslexia. So we're asking them about their child's ability to rhyme, their phonological awareness skills, and how.
So I'm sorry, because everybody won't know. Tell us what a phonological awareness skill would be.
Right. So the phonological awareness skills would be how the child does when they have to manipulate single speech sounds. So how they do with like taking a sound off and saying the word, or replacing it with another letter and saying the complete word.
Let's give them examples. So,
sure. Like if I said clap, and now say clap without they would have to pull that L sound out of the word, and they'd have to say cap.
Okay, so and it could be from the beginning or the end or the middle of the word. All right, so you're asking the parents about rhyming, you said, and depending on the age of the child, they may or may not remember that.
Right. So ask them about how they're learning of sight words and their alphabet skills and letter sound correspondence, like knowing that A can say A, or it can also say A.
Okay, so knowing the alphabet, but then knowing the sounds of the alphabet.
Correct. And then how they have done, or like their progression of decoding, and then how they're doing with their reading fluency over time and currently. So we ask them to describe their reading out loud.
Okay, and what would you be looking for in that reading out loud?
So some of the things that we listen to when they're talking about their reading is we're seeing how it flows. Does it flow, or is it more choppy, and is it very laborious for the child to read? Do they have to stop and sound out words as they're reading, or are they able to phrase the sentences correctly and it sounds like natural language? We'll also ask, how they do with reading with intonation and expression, or like if parents will say like it's more monotone. And also we're also seeing if parents will say like when their child is reading, are they able to understand what they read, or they spent so much effort reading the sentence and decoding each word that they couldn't even tell you what they read. So we're really looking to see like how they're reading, their fluency, their prosody, and like if they have intonation, expression, or if it really takes a lot of effort to even decode those words.
So that's what you're asking the parents, right?
So we ask them a very general question. We ask them, how would you describe your child's reading? Okay. And so like those different things kind of come up. So those are some of the key things that we kind of listen toward.
From the parents?
Yes. Okay, so we're not necessarily asking them each of those things, because we don't want them to, we don't want to lead them to certain words, but those are a lot of the things that we kind of pick out from the parent interview that kind of shows that those clinical indicators of that reading difficulty.
Okay, so you've got the parent interview. They've come to you, they're concerned. They've got the parent interview. So then what's the next step? And
so after we do the parent interview, we also tell parents to send a teacher interview to their current teachers. So that's another very important piece, is to get information from the teacher. So we ask them some different questions about their academic and social performance at school. So we're asking them specifically, what are the strengths of that child? What are their areas of weakness or struggle? When we also ask them if they could describe their reading, and we give them some different choices, and we ask them if there's any specific concerns they have with speech and language, and even social, emotional, or behavioral concerns, as well as what accommodations are they currently getting and what interventions are they currently getting, because all of that information is very important in addition to the parent interview we do.
So what about academic? Do you get any academic grades from the school?
Yeah, so lots of times the parents will supply a report card, or they'll also supply progress monitoring or progress reports, DIBELS scores or benchmark scores. They'll also send if they have any evaluations from the school, or if they currently have a 504 plan or an IEP.
Okay, and what about other conditions, other medical diagnoses, other doctors' notes? What
Yeah,
about
so
that?
yeah, so that's a very important piece as well. So in the parent interview, we do ask them if they have any medical diagnoses. And so if they do have any medical diagnoses, we do have the parents supply us with an evaluation from the psychologist or doctor or whatever evaluations they may have, and doctor documentation about those diagnoses.
Okay, so we've got the clinical history, which is really important. Now, then you schedule the child to come. Do you interview the child or
Yes,
the
so
student?
that's right. So that's we find that that's a very important piece to do first thing with the child, because lots of times the child is very anxious and nervous because they're afraid of like what they're going to be given or what the tests are. So we start off with a student interview. So we make it more of a conversation with the student to kind of get them warmed up and, just feel welcomed and just really listening to them, because the student also supplies a lot of great information about themselves as well. So we ask the students what they enjoy about school, and it doesn't have to be a subject. Sometimes they'll say they like lunch or they like recess. They also will tell us, is there anything that they don't like about school, or is there anything that's hard for them at school? And then we also ask them, even outside of school, do they like to read, or do they have a favorite book, or like what kinds of books do they like to read? And then what do they like to do like outside of school, like in their free time, what they like to do for fun.
Okay. And then is it the testing after that? Once they're comfortable with you, then it's
Yes.
the testing. So let's
Yes.
talk about the testing.
Sure.
What testing are you doing? And then let's talk a little bit about each test, and then we'll summarize the process and what you're looking for.
Sure. So first we give a test called the KBIT, which is the Kaufman Brief Intelligence Test. So this is a brief intelligence assessment, and there's 2 different subtests in this assessment. So first it's testing their verbal skills. So it's having them look at pictures, and you're asking them to say which picture matches like the word that you said, or answer the question that was asked to them. So I might say, what tells you how much something weighs? And they're looking at different pictures, and they're telling us, oh, it's, the scale, and they're numbered on the
Right. That would be for the really young, right?
Yeah. So the older ones, they might have precipitation, and they have to tell us which picture shows precipitation, which I think there was someone outside like in the rain.
Okay, so there's 2 parts in this. Again, you said it's a brief intelligence test, so it's not a longer intelligence test, but it's a normed intelligence test. It's a standardized intelligence test. It has the verbal and the nonverbal piece. Correct?
Yes. So the second part would be the nonverbal, which is testing their reasoning skills. So they're looking at different pictures, and they're trying to figure out which piece would be the missing piece of like the puzzle. Okay. So it starts off with pictures, and then it moves on to like shapes, more complex.
Okay. So after they do the intelligence test, what are your other pieces, your other tests that are
so then the next test we give is called the CTOP. So that's the Comprehensive Test of Phonological Processing. So this is an assessment where we're having them manipulate single speech sounds. And there are 3 different subtests we give on the CTOP.
So you're not giving the whole CTOP, you're giving 3 subtests.
Correct.
And
yes.
That was actually, that was decided in conjunction with the Shaywitzes.
Correct, because those 3 subtests will give you an overall score for their phonological awareness skills.
And what are those 3 subtests?
So the first subtest is elision, where they're asked to delete a sound in a word. So we might say to the student to say cup, and then say cup without k, and they would have to say up. And then it gets more complex as you go, where it starts to take it out of like a blend, like say snail without n, and they would have to say sail. The second subtest is blending words, where the evaluator says individual sounds, and they have to blend the sounds together to say the word. So we might say saw, and they have to say the word saw. And again, it kind of gets more complex, even words that have more than 1 syllable. And then the third subtest, this is when it's phoneme isolation. So this is when they're isolating a single sound in a word. What's the first sound in the word man? And they would have to say And then again, it gets more complex as we go further, where they have to take apart blends, like what's the second sound in train, and they would have to say er.
So I think this is really important because for people out there that are just learning about dyslexia, it's this phonological piece processing where the dyslexic child has difficulty, and that is necessary to access the language system. So if you skip that piece and you're trying to have the child read, but they don't even have this phonological awareness, really understand how to map or connect the spoken word with the written word, and they can memorize some words, but they won't become good readers because they don't have that baseline ability. So after the CTOP, which again is just a wonderful test, what would be your next?
Then we give the assessment called the Towery, and so that's a test of their word reading efficiency. So this assessment is timed. So this is when they're given, there's two subtests. So the first subtest is when they're given a list of sight words, and they're reading as many sight words as they can, as fast as they can, for 45 seconds. And then they're given a second list of words, and then these are nonsense words. So they are fake words, so it's forcing them to decode. They can't memorize the word because it's not a real word. So instead of reading it, they might have to read ip, or instead of reading muddy, they might have to read luddy.
They have to say those words, and that gives you insight,
yes,
again, into their decoding skills.
Correct.
Okay.
And so again, that test is timed. So they're reading as many as fast as they can within a time of 45 seconds.
Okay. And so then after that?
And then we give an oral reading fluency assessment. So we give the Dibbles or the AMSWeb just based on their grade. So this is when they're reading about 3 different passages that's on grade level, and they're reading the passage for 1 minute. And as they're reading out loud, the evaluator is marking all their errors. So we're marking like if they have a mispronunciation, if they have a substitution, if they're omitting a word, inserting a word, or even we'll mark too like if they are not phrasing correctly, or if they totally miss like a punctuation mark and just kind of read over it and to the next sentence. The oral reading fluency, it measures their words correct per minute, which is their rate. We're also measuring their accuracy. So out of the words that they read correct in that minute, how accurate were they? And you want to be at least 95% or higher to be able to read, that passage independently. And we also were taking like observational notes too about their fluency. Are they reading with intonation and expression? Does their reading flow, or is it choppy? Is it word by word? Are they having to stop and pause before they say the word, or are they having to stop and sound out the word before they say it? Or even some of them, they try to sound it out, but they're having trouble. So the evaluator has to give them that word after 3 seconds, so then they can go to the next word. So we're looking at those 3 different components of fluency with that oral reading fluency assessment: the rate, the accuracy, and then also the prosody.
Oh, they've gone through, they've come in, you've talked to the parents and you interview the child, then they're taking the IQ test, they've taken the CTOP to test their phonological awareness. Mm-hmm. And then they've done the Towery, which is a time test, again, looking at sight words and decoding. And then you're looking at oral reading fluency, which a lot of people will give these tests on the computer to children with silent reading. And you really can't tell the full scale of fluency if a child is reading silently. So this is a great test. It's really important, like Sarah talked about. So accuracy is one thing you're looking at. Rate is important because the children with dyslexia are reading from an inefficient system. Remember, we talked about before, if you heard the other podcast, on the right side of the brain. So they're reading slower with much effort. And so it could be accurate. It may not be accurate, depending if they've had any tutoring or teaching. And then you'd expect it to be slower. And because they're working, they're often not using a lot of the prosody or the intonation. So they're working so hard to figure out what that word says that they're certainly not understanding what they're reading, but they have no melody to their reading. And that prosody, and this is the bridge from reading to comprehension. And it's a really critical thing to understand that these dyslexic children have that phonological processing. They're slow readers because it's on the right side of the brain. They're so focused on trying to get the sounds of the word, the names of the word, that they're not able to read with the melody, and they're certainly not able to comprehend. And if they do, it's going to be for a short while because they're tired. And the tests are either 2 or 3 tests like Sarah talked about, and usually you'll see that they actually do less well as it goes along because they're tired. So let's talk about now taking all those clinical information, taking the test, and you're going to write a summation and decide if the child is dyslexic or not.
Correct. Yes. So we score all the assessments, and then we also, again, we always go back to that clinical history because that's a very important piece. And we also go back to the teacher interviews as well. And so we write a whole full report for the parents that has their scores, the clinical history, and the teacher interview as well. So,
and you're using the definition in federal law and state law, which, yes, if you want to go over that.
Yes. So Louisiana Law Act 206 defines dyslexia as an unexpected difficulty in reading for someone who has the intelligence to be a much better reader, and it's most commonly due to that difficulty in phonological processing. So that's really that appreciation of the individual sounds of spoken language, which then affects their ability to read, speak, and spell.
Right. And also, just to let people know, if you don't live in Louisiana, it's also in federal law. So it's an up-to-date 21st century scientific definition. So if you take that definition and sort of help merge the definition with how you're making the decision that the child's dyslexic.
Sure. So the key word in that definition is that it's unexpected. So we're really looking for that unexpected of their reading difficulty. So we talked about, we gave the brief intelligence assessment. So students with dyslexia have average to above average intelligence. When we're looking at the assessments, if they've got average intelligence, if they've got that intelligence to be a good reader. And then we'll look at the different other assessments like the CTOP, the DIBELS, and the TABRI. And, if a student is very poor or low on those 3 things, that's showing that it's an unexpected difficulty. They've got their intelligence, so it's in the average, above average range, but they're low or very poor when it comes to manipulating single speech sounds and being able to quickly and accurately decode unfamiliar words. So it's showing that clear evidence that it's an unexpected difficulty. Again, they have that intelligence, but that reading difficulty really lies when it comes to manipulating those single speech sounds.
So I think it's important, and I know we've talked about this in the podcast before, that the studies show, evidence shows that if you're not dyslexic, your IQ and your reading ability track. They correlate. So the higher your IQ, the higher your reading ability. In dyslexics, that's not true. They don't converge. One is flat and the other is on a slope. So that is that unexpected. Now, and that's really important. It is controversial with some people, but the definition grounded in science from the Shaywitzes, which are both on the National Science Foundation, National Academy of Sciences, I should say, and their work over decades shows, again, that this is an isolated deficit in a child who has an average to above average IQ. We are not talking about cutoffs on the IQ or the language test. It is not like fill in the dots here, and it's not a cookie cutter. It's a clinical diagnosis, and it's because that can influence things, whether the child's had tutoring, whether the child's repeated a grade. And so it is a nuanced, not, again, looking at standard deviations of 1 or 2 and calling it, oh, yes, it is, or no, it's not. Because dyslexia can look different. It looks different because IQs are different. It's a complex disease. It can be mild, moderate, or severe, IQs are different, exposure's different. So anyway, so that's that unexpected difficulty. And it's not a global difficulty. There are other language-based disorders, not as common as dyslexia, where there's more than phonological processing issues. And those children would not be dyslexic and should be identified and given what they need. But today we are talking, and what we do at the Dyslexia Resource Center is help the dyslexic kid. So as Sarah has delineated for us very clearly, is a clinical diagnosis based on testing, which then shows this unexpected difficulty in reading, primarily due to a phonological difficulty. And it's matching that spoken word to the printed word. So Sarah, give us an example of a child and a family that was struggling because they didn't know their child was dyslexic, and they came to see you at the DRC.
Sure. So we've actually had quite a few parents that have come to the Dyslexia Resource Center, and they'll tell us like they're at like a total loss, or sometimes they'll even start breaking down in tears because they know that, something's going on with their child, but the schools are not doing anything, but they know that their child needs help. So the parents will tell us about their clinical history piece about like the school. Lots of times the schools, they may have done some progress monitoring or maybe some, tier 1 or tier 2 or even tier 3 intervention, but the parents will say the schools refuse to do a dyslexia testing or even a dyslexia screener until they get to, second grade or third grade, and then, you have this poor, first or second grader that's clearly struggling at school or even, failing some certain subjects, or sometimes they may be, passing all the subjects, but you can tell that they're still struggling when it comes to the reading and decoding. So the parents will come to us because the schools are saying that they can't do anything until they get to a certain grade or until they fail like enough. Yeah. So they'll come to us because they know something, is going on. And so they'll get tested through us. And, if they're found to be dyslexic, we give recommendations that schools should offer students with dyslexia. And we also always tell students about, or the parents about, a charter school here in Baton Rouge called Louisiana Key Academy. And so some parents have sent their kid to Louisiana Key Academy, and they've told us that it was like they've called and even told us before, like it was a complete turnaround for their child. Like their child actually loves to go to school now, and that they can just see like a smile, like this glow with their child when they come home, and that they're just telling them all the different things that they've learned about, and they're just excited about school because that, that they knew that they were smart and they have all this information that they can share. It just might be in a different way. So having that identification as early as possible really helps, their self-image and their self-confidence and their self-esteem as well, because they know, hey, I'm smart. They've got that, now they've got a name for it. I have dyslexia, but they can still, they know that they can succeed and do all the things that they want to do for their future. And it all comes back down to they need to be identified as early as possible, because it really does affect so many things besides just academics too when they're not identified as early as possible.
So that's great. So I know there are lots of stories, and yes, what we hear over and over is that a lot of times the parents come in and they are crying because yes, it's heartbreaking when your child is struggling and you feel like, and that your child's bright, but you're not getting and you don't understand what's going on. So we conclude this episode of the DRC podcast, but we have the links here for the DRC. So the DRC does the testing like we talked about. There is a Louisiana Key Academy in Baton Rouge and several other cities in Louisiana, but the DRC also does online therapy, which is the evidence-based instruction for children in 1st through 5th grade in the instruction they need to learn how to access the language system in order to read, to begin that reading process. So I encourage you to check out the links, check out our website, and hope you have a great day, and hopefully you'll join us for our next podcast. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you for having me.